Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will feature oily Mormons, eternal French stew, and the mystical art of staring at an ant. All this and more on this episode of Created Things. Hello and welcome to Created Things, the only beauty podcast hosted by two beautiful dudes. I'm beautiful dude number one, artist and psychotherapist, Jacob Flores Popcheck. With me, as always, is my good and excellent friend, beautiful dude number two, Father Gabriel Toretta.
I'm Father Gabriel Toretta. I do kind of prefer the beautiful dude number two, actually. I'm going to take that. That'll be good.
You should put that on your business cards. Beautiful dude number two.
AKA.
Yeah.
The real.
AKA the real Slim Shady.
Yes. I too grew up in the 90s.
Yeah. Okay, you just flashed your mug on screen. Tell me about your mug today, Father Gabriel.
This is a mug, which is to be distinguished from a mugging. So it's
Why do
it's
you
got
have to
stuff.
Clarify that.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify. Just,
Okay.
Words are hard, okay? Like, some
Yeah,
words
fair
sound
enough.
like words. It's a mug that has pictures of things on it. It's a hodgepodge of paintings from Western art history.
Okay,
It just goes ahead and
very
has about, like, one thing from the Middle Ages, because, like, the Middle Ages is apparently boring, and nothing really happens in it. Anyway,
Right.
it's great.
It's
It was a
only
gift,
your exclusive purview.
fact. It was a gift from good friends for Christmas one year, and it's really great. It's also gigantic. You see, it's like a significant portion of the size of my head. Now my head is not huge, but
Right.
for all you audio listeners out there, imagine like a normal sized head, and you've imagined my head.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty apt description. You for as smart a person as you are, you have a surprisingly average sized head.
Yes, this is what happens with heads. Yes, that's all I have to say about that.
We do this basically every time we start this podcast. We like have an extended conversation about what we're drinking. I'm embarrassed. I'm only drinking water today because I'm so dehydrated. But the reason I'm
that's
so
sad.
dehydrated is because the other thing we always talk about at the beginning of our podcast, which is part of a segment that's becoming increasingly an integral and established part of this podcast, where in the world are Jacob and Father Gabriel.
Jacob and Father Gabriel.
So with that, my question to you is, since we are in a new place pretty much every time we record this episode, where in the
far.
world is Father Gabriel today? And then I'll tell you about where I am.
I am where I technically actually live. So this is technically actually my home, and I'm in Chicago.
You're in
That's why I
Chicago.
have like my sweet things here, like my sweet these are squid. You can't, our audio listeners, imagine a gigantic octopus that has been made out of plastic resin and is then done to be the shape of a book holder so that you can use it as a bookend.
And
It's
painted
a squid,
to look
however.
like
It's an
bronze.
octopus.
It's an
Yes,
octopus.
and painted to look like bronze. It's the most amazing thing. I love it completely. My parents gave it to me for Christmas one time.
Aw.
It's the best. Anyway, so I have my swag with me. I'm sorry, the order swag. I have a vow of poverty because this is where I technically live. Jacob Flores Popcheck, explain yourself.
Well, I am where I'm technically from. God help us all. I am in Steubenville, Ohio, currently. Having briefly detoured through Wichita, Kansas. I am in town to visit some friends and some family down here. And yeah, it's pretty much. I'll tell you a quick story about Steubenville that, you know, I think Steubenville has this mythos around it for like really like dyed in the wool Catholics. You know, Steubenville has kind of a certain je ne sais quoi to it, the same way that when you talk to like a Muslim friend, if you mention like Mecca, I presume, you know, it would have that same kind of vibe. But my experience of Steubenville has been very different. When I was a little freshman at Franciscan University of Steubenville, I, being a young white nerd, had some swords that I was very, very, excited about, loved very, very much. And I decided to bring them to my dorm room, despite weapons being very clearly not allowed. And I kept them in the dorm room. And the RAs who would do this thing where when you were gone, they would just unlock your door and sneak around your room to see if you had any like immoral contraband, because that's the kind of place,
contra
Franciscan is.
swords.
Right, exactly. And they found the swords and they reported me, and I was brought into the RD's office. And I'm telling you this because this was the case I made to the RD. I said, look, we're living in a perpetually gray and rainy valley where the sun is literally blotted out by the putrid emissions of a 90-year-old steel mill.
Fact.
We are on top of a little hill with medieval churches and castles on it. And at the time, the Princess of Luxembourg was actually studying at our school. And I said to the RD, for these reasons, when, not if, a dragon attacks, you will want someone with a sword.
You've got a point. He has a point.
It was a real point, right? That's a legitimate point.
You've got a princess. Like. You've got Smog. That's with an OG, not an AUG.
Right.
You've got little huts. You have people who would probably be delicious if you were a dragon.
We have sort of medievally minded Christian people.
Yes.
Really, it's if I were looking to,
it was altruistic. What I'm hearing you say, this is altruistic.
Yeah, I'm basically. It's not for me to say that I'm a hero, but you can say.
Yeah,
that I'm a
exactly.
hero.
But other people could say it for you. Which I'm willing to do.
Despite the obvious ecosystemic reasons justifying my possessing the swords, the RD did not bite, and I was fined $75 and had to get rid of him.
That's $75 for violating the no weapons policy. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not horrible. It's not the worst fine I paid while I was there.
That's encouraging. I feel like this could also be a whole part of our series for
will be.
What is it like for us, the two of us, to talk together? Well, first you tell me about some fines you incurred.
Right.
And then listen, this is apropos of nothing, but I'm going to tell you a thing I learned like an hour ago, and this is hot off the presses. I nearly blew up. I couldn't believe it.
Father Gabriel learned a new thing.
I learned a thing,
and his head grew 2 sizes that day.
Yes, exactly. Now I have a big head. It's such a thing, I couldn't even believe it. So I read so many books by Orson Scott Card when I was a kid.
Okay.
He's this really great. Yeah, he's this really great science fiction author. And I read so many of his books. He has this, I believe, 5-volume science fiction series that's really, really, really good. And only at the end of it did I realize that it was a 5-volume science fiction retelling of the Book of Mormon.
What?
Which it is. It's the most amazing thing. It's so good.
Wait, so this book series you read, you only found out an hour ago, was actually like Narnia, but for Mormonism?
No, this is all background.
Okay,
I knew all that
okay.
because I read him obsessively as a child, and for much of my life. No, the new thing I just found out is that Orson Scott Card is Brigham Young's great-great-grandson.
What?
Yes, this was my reaction. I couldn't believe it. I was blowing up. He is actually Brigham Young's great-great-grandson.
Oh, that's too weird.
It's a fact. Yeah, some of his books have some pretty kinky situations going on. You just think
that's
like
Mormonism for you, man.
Well, no, but I'm not saying like people married to like many people. I'm saying like, wow, this isn't like Twilight, like I love you, but you're a vampire, but let's like hug and be best friends and like with all of our clothes on kind of situation.
Twilight because of course that's the other great work of Mormon fantasy fiction.
Right. Yes. Did I hear you describe it as great? Because
well, I mean, as far okay,
because
man.
No comment. No, because no comment. This was a note.
Okay,
you know
man,
what, Jacob?
I was 14 years old. I had a huge crush on this girl. She was super hot, and she loved Twilight, so I read all the books. And it was before the movies came out, and I didn't not enjoy them.
Wow. So gentle listeners, this is our Mistakes We Have Made podcast.
Going, yeah, in order. Liking a woman, reading Twilight, going to Franciscan University.
No, one of those is not a mistake.
Only one, though, and the listener gets to choose which it is.
That's exactly right. So, yeah. Okay. No, but this is incredible. Yes, I found this out because I was obsessively trying to figure out if the fake doctor who started Young Living, the essentially oily company, was
I've never heard of this.
Young Living, you know, they make all the, like, they do most of, like, the essential oils that are sold in America.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a big company whom I will not give free advertising to by mentioning their name. But there's this other one which I only know about because I spent, like, most of the last year living in Salt Lake City because COVID. Just pretend that follows. And anyway, I passed by their headquarters one time and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the essentially oily people. And it turns out, so they're called Young Living in part because they were founded by this guy, Gary Young, which is amazing in part because his name really reminds me of what's the evil pastor from Kimmy Schmidt. His name is Gary Glenn Wayne. Gary Wayne.
Yeah, Glenn Wayne. Gary Wayne. Yes.
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like that, which is amazing. And I was trying to figure out if this D. Gary Young is in fact in any way related to Brigham Young, and all I could say is that
yes,
very responsible websites with names like Oil Wellness for You. .wordpress.com said that he was.
Oh my God.
So I think that's also proven. So I have discovered various things. One is that Brigham Young is in some fashion essentially oily, and another is that Orson Scott Card is his great grandson. So
you mentioned not wanting to give. That's first of all incredible.
Incredible. There's just like so many. The world is amazing.
The world is an amazing place, full of wonders. You also mentioned, not wanting to give them free advertising, but that actually hits on an idea I've been wanting to talk to you about. I would like money for this podcast.
Me too.
I want people to pay me money, and it's very, very hard, notoriously hard, to get sponsors for your podcast, right? Very, very hard to get people to sponsor your podcast. But if you ever listen to a podcast, you know that the big ones all have sponsors. Randomly, they'll just stop and they'll say, this episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Do you want to make a website or some other nonsense? And it's always like the same 5 companies that sponsor these things. But I had an idea. What if instead of hustling really hard to find sponsors for our podcast, what if you and I periodically throughout the episodes just did anti-sponsorships? We just talk about preferably like small Catholic companies because of the focus of our thing, and just trash them. Just trash these companies. Do like ads against them, like the kinds you see about politicians every 4 years, and then they have to pay us to stop doing it.
Or competitors could pay us to do this,
right?
And you won't know. Like, are these just these guys like legit hot takes, or maybe it was maybe like, are they being paid? Was that like a pro Young Living thing that just happened? Are we in favor of being essentially oily or not? Like, it's kind of complicated. I mean.
Right. I'm essentially oily, but it's a dermatological condition, not.
Yeah, I am, but I'm Italian, so it's just kind of that's how it goes. I don't really. I mean, it doesn't. Let me put it this way: it doesn't smell nice.
No.
So I don't really know why people are so into it because like I've been essentially oily my whole life, and like people tell me like you have to take a shower and things like that, which I don't understand. Like
right.
I'm a marketable commodity.
Right, exactly. But I think what else is a marketable commodity, is us ragging on companies until they give us money in sort of a blackmail sort of a situation. So if you, gentle listener, have an idea for a company that you would like us to do an anti-sponsorship for, shoot us an email or get in touch with us on our Instagram at Created Things Podcast, and we will do a nega commercial for that.
Yes.
All that aside, we got a very cool topic lined up for today, Father Gabriel. We got a very, very cool topic. A topic that is interesting to both you and I in our professional lives. You as a priest, as a pastor, and me as a both an artist and a psychotherapist. We have very different doors into this house, but it is the same house that we are entering into, and that is the idea of how to make your life more beautiful. I think beauty is a thing that is talked about sort of amorphously, sort of abstractly, as something that only defines paintings or statues and things like that. But this is a value. This is a point that is very close to both of our hearts. That lives are made to be beautiful themselves. So maybe you could give me some of your thoughts on just this topic generally before we kind of break down some specific how-tos for our listeners on how maybe they can actually make their lives more beautiful. What would you say, I guess, it means to make a life beautiful, or why is that even something we should be striving for?
Yeah, see, the thing is, like, people write all kinds of stuff, and they have for years and years, decades, hundreds of years, about beauty, and they think about beauty theologically. And ultimately what this always comes down to, what people are always talking about, is like, basically this is our life, like that there's something about what it means to be a human being that, like, by its nature, it has beauty to it. It manifests some of God's beauty, actually, and that's part of what's amazing about the individual human life, is that, like, when we're talking about, for instance, like, holiness, we're talking about manifesting something about God's beauty that only this one person can manifest, that nobody else can. um Even somebody who's not living a totally perfectly holy life, like, in some ways are manifesting in a lesser degree something of God's beauty. And so there's something that's like, really, this is actually who we are. This is actually deeply integrated in what it means to be a human being. But because it's so deep and because it's so rich, it's going to mean that there's all kinds of different layers here, like a parfait, one could say. But there's all kinds of different layers.
Everybody
Like,
love
everything's
parfait.
fact. Everybody love parfait. So I feel like it's worth our time to actually stop and think, and unpack that. And ultimately, I mean, I think that's pretty much what we're trying to do all the time here on the podcast, like,
Sure.
including essentially oily asides aside, is that, there is actually just too much here to talk about and just say, like, well, this is what beauty is, this is how you do it, go home, like, we're just kind of like, we have to talk around this, think like, how would I live into this? What would it be like?
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things about beauty, I would say, one last thing I would say is that, one of the things about beauty is it has this kind of attractive character to it by its very nature, that, like, we look at it, we want to just, like, behold it and contemplate it and let it change our lives. And so one thing that we're trying to do here is sort of unveil a little bit about, like, here's something that I've seen that was a beauty that drew me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm telling you about it because I think it might draw you too. And if it doesn't,
Right.
it doesn't. But, like, here's something that I know that was beautiful and true, and that I've seen it, and I want you to see it too if you can.
Yeah, which I think is one of the most intimate and beautiful experiences two people can have together. I'm also excited about this topic because I've mentioned this to you off air before, but many years ago, I was in talks with a certain Catholic radio station to actually do a radio program on the arts and on beauty, a more formal version of what you and I are doing here. And one of the questions that the producers asked that eventually made it that we didn't end up going forward with the project because they couldn't get past it was, why should someone who's not an artist care about beauty at all? And they just couldn't get past that. And what was funny to me is again, this is a Catholic radio program saying this, and presumably we have some listeners who are not Catholics, and I welcome you. Everybody's welcome here. But I will say that from a Catholic perspective, something that was very drilled into me by some of my theological mentors was that beauty is seen as a human right by Catholics along the same wavelength as, food and water. That, when we're caring for the homeless person, it's not just about, for instance, the stereotypical sort of caring for the poor. It's not just about, okay, are they fed? Are they watered? It's also about making sure, are we presenting beauty in their life, which was in no small part, the guiding philosophy behind building some of the churches that now, non-Catholic people will often say, well, why don't you just sell the church and give that money to the poor? Well, because we sort of built those churches for the poor as well to fulfill another legitimate human right, which is the right to be exposed to beauty. And so I kind of have come into my whole adult life, both as an artist and as a psychotherapist, with this personal charism that says, hey, people need beauty in order to live well. They need to feel beautiful personally. They need to be able to observe beauty practically in their lives. They need to be kind of steeped in a beautiful philosophy or perspective or worldview, what have you. And then to be encountered by very well-meaning people. I mean, they're great folks, but very well-meaning people who were like, well, this is just a thing for artists, was so discouraging and was really instrumental in planting the seed that eventually birthed this podcast. So I'm excited to talk about just a few ways that people can personally make their lives more beautiful. Picking up, of course, where, you're saying, hey, this is something that I've found beautiful. Maybe you won't, but it'd be awesome if you do. These points that you and I have come up with that are easy ways to make your life more beautiful are coming not from, I don't think, theological documents or psychological treatises. They're coming from our lived experience.
Yeah. No, that's right. Of course, one funny thing about what you just said is that, like, that the radio station's response is that most artists would say, well, what does beauty have to do with being an artist? Because basically post World War II, there's this post World War One, and in World War II, there's this really heavy shift in most aspects of art creation in Europe and America that is like very, very, very anti-beauty, very specifically and intentionally, and kind of well conceived. So well and badly conceived at various times. So that's also kind of an extra funny bonus of the whole prayer thing.
Super funny, and it sort of makes, not to get too Catholic about all of it, but it's it sort of makes beauty that baby Jesus for whom there's no room at the inn. Nobody has room for beauty. Artists don't have room for beauty anymore. They don't want to make it. They want to make, they want to explore truth, which is, truth as a word for many artists is just shorthand for ugliness and cynicism. And, the average Joe, the average probably listener to this podcast doesn't have time for beauty. That's really low on the Maslow hierarchy of needs that they're living their life by. And I mean, besides you, I don't hear a whole lot of clergy talking about beauty that often outside of the pinkies up version that, makes people ashamed of themselves. So, it really is this sad little baby Jesus wandering around just looking for a place to spend the night. Maybe this podcast can be a little beauty manger.
Yes, let's do it. You couldn't see, but I was trying to like hold my hands like I'm swaddling a baby, but it didn't really work.
You're swaddling beauty itself.
Yes.
That can be an opening for a future podcast. The only podcast where we swaddle beauty.
Swaddling.
All right, that's enough of that. Enough prelude. Why don't you start us off, Father? Why don't you give us the first point you would give to anyone looking to make their life a little bit more beautiful, if that idea isn't too broad?
Yeah. Well, you said this isn't coming from theological documents or psychological treatises. It's coming from real life. And I'm saying, well, let me tell you something that is also, it's kind of also.
Well, I guess I should say that. It is coming from all of those places, but we have lived it as well.
Also,
we have sort of, these are all kind of pre-myth-bustered by us in our personal life. I guess I would
exactly.
Say.
Precisely.
Right. We've already road tested them, and they're user ready.
As far as I can tell. So, Pope John Paul II wrote this really breathtaking, very beautiful letter to artists.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of it, he just goes on to explain. So he's talking to artists, and he's like, blah 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 blah. You artists, you do things, and he's great. It's the whole thing is stupendous. But then he says at the end, he's basically everyone needs to realize that like everyone is the fundamental call that everyone has as being a human being is to be an artist of their own life,
Mhm.
and that their life is the work of art that they are called to work on and called to make beautiful.
Right.
And for me, this realization, this was like an explosive realization. It's like a dropping a bomb where, and I think coming to this, like actually sitting with this and letting it kind of like unpack in you is something that it's the first thing that I would recommend to anybody who says like, I just kind of feel like my life needs beauty in some kind of a way, and maybe I don't exactly know what that means yet, but I kind of want it. I want something, you know. I say sit with this idea and like see where it might go, because there's just something immense here, right? It's just immense. This idea that like, so for one thing, speaking for somebody who is not an artist and that can't do anything, you know, except for like order plastic resin gold painted octopus bookends from the internet.
Which, in fairness, even your parents did for you, so you can't even claim that.
Fact, that is actually something my parents did for me.
Yeah.
So I hear artist and like I think all kinds of things, you know, the beret, the cigarettes, you know, like whatever, the tête bens, or whatever, or you think like,
Which
what's his
inadvertently
name?
you just described me perfectly. I
did, in fact,
wear a
yeah, he doesn't have a
beret.
cigarette,
I wear
though, which
very,
is
very,
sad.
very tight pants, notoriously so.
Yeah,
So you just described. That's all it
true.
takes to be an artist. I mean, you
Yeah,
nailed
gentle
me.
viewer, beware, tight pants.
Yeah, this is all
And
it's all very chest up, even in the video version. But you'd be alarmed,
yeah, it's
to
because
say
of the
the
tight
least.
pants. Yeah, that's why we're not
Yeah.
doing full body shot
Yeah.
like we would. But because I think that's pretty normal.
Yeah.
I Oh, got so distracted by that. Yes.
When you
Is
hear artists,
or
you
we think
of
like
lots of
maybe
different
like
things.
Damien Hirst, you know, which is the like he took a human skull and covered it in diamonds because it's a statement. I don't know.
Right,
why.
or you
It's
nail a
statement.
banana to a wall, or
That's
you know,
art, bro.
right.
Yeah.
Very
So we think
artsy.
of art and we think like this kind of stuff, or you know, or then you think of like the quote great masters, or you think of whatever. But the point is, it's like always somebody else, right? Like it's always somebody else, maybe somebody else with something a little bit wrong with them, or something a lot wrong with them, or somebody who's a little bit of a fraud, or a lot of a fraud, and like that's kind of what we think of for artists, you know.
Yeah, fair.
But John Paul II, like this is to me, this is a really revolutionary idea. Is like hold the phone. Everybody is an artist, and I don't mean this in this kind of like silly sort of like, oh my gosh, you just drew this and it's so amazing. I'm gonna put it on the fridge. It's not like God is like looking at this garbage that you drew and like I'm gonna put this on the celestial fridge. You know,
Mhm.
it's like no. But just like literally, what is an art? What is a work of art? It's something. It's an action of human making. It's something made by human manufacture, artifice. You know, literally. And the first and greatest thing that we have that literally everybody has and is responsible for is like his or her own life. That this is literally a work of art, and because it's a work of art, it is by its nature to be beautiful. It has beauty about it, and the more that it can be fashioned well to be it will be beautiful. And I just think that's something very powerful and very liberating.
Yeah, I agree, and it's a beautiful thing because we theologically, of course, we talk about being God's artwork, being his masterpiece. In fact, the masterpiece of creation, the only thing that, according to Genesis, he reviewed as being very good, right? As opposed to just saw that it was good. But we are not static, right? We're not an artwork that ends. We're an artwork that continues. We somehow are not just the painting. We are also the brush that continues to perpetuate the painting. An analogy I often use with my clients, because I will often speak to, this is maybe tangential, but I think it's related. I will often speak to clients who are very, very discouraged by, oh my gosh, I have so far to go in terms of my personal progress or growth or getting past this, this wound or this issue. And I always relate to them this analogy where, famously, when Walt Disney opened Disneyland, he said Disneyland will never be finished. Disneyland will never be finished. The idea being that they would always be adding and subtracting attractions and augmenting things and taking things away and adding things. That it was a living creature, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I always then ask the client, okay, so as perpetually unfinished as Disneyland is intentionally designed to be, is it incomplete? Is it not yet open for business? Is it not yet the most magical place on earth, right? The answer to all those questions, for the purposes of the analogy anyway, being no, right? It is open for business. It is established. It is complete, ostensibly, right? And at least if the marketing slogan is to be believed that it's the most magical place on earth, right?
Hey,
but it's
if marketers lie, who can you trust? Okay, that's just, this is how I live.
it's a very fragile Jenga tower upon which we exist, you and I. But yeah,
exactly.
no, and yet it is this perpetually unfinished thing. And I like to think of us as the children of God in much the same way. He has created us as complete artworks, but we aren't finished, and beautifully, he has not made us bystanders in that. He has actually gifted us the paintbrush to continue sort of finishing ourselves, if you will, to partake in the artistic process of making beautiful our own lives. And in doing so, entrusts us with a really profound creative dignity, because, most other religions would just consider, hey, God or the gods or a spirit, sort of fashioned you and you're done. And now it's just, that's it. That's the end of the story. But we are in this active participatory role with God that I don't think is any small thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. Yeah, that this is, and that also, it's also, what I think is so splendid about this is so starting in 17th 18th century, like, it's this like very romantic, with a capital R, notion of like what an artist is. So like Kant has all this stuff about like the genius, the artistic genius, and then we kind of get this idea that, like, yeah, I guess part of this idea that artists are some special kind of human being. They have some sort of genius connection to the muses or whatever, where it just kind of seems like, oh, they just like sit around and then they just like bang out this incredible poem or this amazing painting or like whatever. But the thing is, like, sculptors are thinking about sculptors are the best, because they are manual laborers.
Sure,
They are
yeah.
manual laborers. You like lift heavy things, you bang heavy things, you like hurt yourself, you get covered in dust, you like choke, or you're dealing with like burning hot metals, and it's hard. Like, this is physically exhausting, super taxing. It is like hard, dirty, ugly labor. Like, at the end of the day of work, like, you are not a gorgeous person. You didn't just like sit around and smoke cigarettes and then have the genius, like,
Yeah.
it's there's like, it was incredible labor. And if anybody just like froze and couldn't see the thing that you were working on and looked at you, they'd be like, this is just some gross, dirty manual laborer, like doing some like gross, dirty thing that I don't want to be involved in. But this is the point. This is what it is like to like be the artist who is allowing his or her own life to be like your masterpiece, your great work of beautiful art. Is that like you get really dirty in it? Like, it doesn't. You get really dirty in it. It is hard work. It is exhausting labor. Like, it might look like it's something totally different entirely. If you were kind of constantly looking at myself, like, I might look really pretty kind of ugly, just weird, distracted, not what I was hoping to look like, all these different things. I didn't think this is what it was going to be like. And yet, like, if I actually concentrate on the thing itself, discover like it is actually becoming beautiful by all of this labor,
Mm.
And I think that's also part of what I find to be so immensely liberating about it, is that, like, when I say think of your life
about
as
this
a work of
idea
art.
of being an art, think of your life as a work of art. Yeah.
Exactly. When I say like think of your life as a work of art, I don't mean like just like bliss out from day to day, and if everything ever like harshes your bliss, just like exile it. No, I don't mean that. I mean like get into it. Get into it. Like go crazy. Do it, like do what's available to you to like do that hard work to like, or do whatever that is available to you to like make your life beautiful, to actually like think of it really as a work of art that like um by the unimportant and whatever things that you do can like actually manifest some of God's own beauty.
I recently
That's
finished
great.
a pretty what you're saying is really resonating, because I recently finished a pretty massive art installation piece that was one of the first I do a lot of digital art, but it was just one of the first like really physical things I sculpted out. um I sort of rendered it digitally, and then we carved it out with a router, and then I carved more of it out by hand, and I spent days sanding it and staining it and painting it and decorating it. This huge thing, and you know, my clothes are ruined by the stain, and I'm covered in the sawdust, and I'm dehydrated as all hell, and I'm, my neck and my back are killing me, and I don't I don't look like what I imagine being an artist looking like. I had a I had this guy is amazing. This amazing art mentor in graduate school, Mark Bender. If anybody is interested in seeing some really, really cool stylized pieces, you should look up Mark Bender illustration. But he always had a joke that the official uniform for graphic designers, that we were only allowed to wear three colors: black, white, and gray, which is really just pastel black, is what he would say. And
Pastel
and
black. That's
so I
nice
sort
of
of
it.
I in part because of that, I have this very sleek image of the artist wearing my crisp white shirt and my black skinny jeans and my idiot Pixar glasses that I wear, and my iPad, and my coffee and everything. Which you and I have joked about the organization Catholic Creatives before. I've spoken at their summit, and you visited, and they're cool people. But I remember pulling up for the first Catholic Creatives summit that I ever attended, and it was literally that. Like, it was like 14 white men with like very trimmed beards, crisp white Oxford shirts, black pants, those like soft leather shoes with like the colorful laces, and then clear rimmed glasses. And I was like, was there a memo that I missed? And this
That's
is
amazing.
the and there I am with my bracelets and my t-shirts and everything. And I'm showing up, and I'm thinking, God, this is what it looks like to be an artist. But when you actually get down to making art, it's ugly and it's sweaty and it's painful and it's gross, and it's the most fulfilling thing in the world. And I
Yeah.
think that if you're able to see the crafting of your life that way, it adds a very Christian, very holistic, very peace giving perspective and mentality to the way that you approach the various challenges of your life, saying, hey, the pain of this, the frustration of this, the ugliness of this, that's not a bug, that's a feature. And actually,
Right.
it's worth it because
Exactly.
I'm making something beautiful and fantastic and edifying and fulfilling that's going to outlive me, that's going to affect many, 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 many people for the better if I intend it to do so, and that is not going to leave me empty either.
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And that yeah, it comes about through these kinds of things. I mean, it's well, I mean, just think, right? Like how do you get an adult who can like do beautiful things and do all these things well? It doesn't happen except through passing this phase where like you just kind of like poo everywhere all the time for a
Yeah.
while, and somebody's got to kind of like take care of that situation, which is like kind of nasty, and that's just how it is. But like, yeah, I mean, when you're doing it, you whatever. New mom or dad changing like 20 diapers a day. Like this does not seem like something tremendously beautiful. But like, guess what? It is actually like this is how you do it. This is just
Yeah.
like, I mean, how do you get this beautiful like statue, like, well, it doesn't happen except by like banging away, chipping away, hacking away, like doing this, doing that, doing this, doing that, which is at the time like exhausting and frustrating. You would kind of wish that you could skip it, but you can't, because
Mm-hmm.
like that thing itself is already the making of the statue.
Yeah, and the faster you accept that, the faster it becomes fun,
Right.
right? Or if not fun, at least edifying or joy giving or fulfilling in
Yeah,
some
fun,
way,
fun.
right?
Maybe some things fun. It may never be fun, but like
Well,
they're
meaningful,
they are what they are.
valuable, I mean,
Yeah.
enriching in some way. I counseled a woman a while back, lovely, lovely woman, but she had been a filmmaker and she should have given that up to be a stay-at-home mom and was struggling with raising her very young child. And we went through this. I was like, because I also am a graduate of film school, and we went through like, hey, when I was working in film school, we would be up at 5 a.m. and we would be sitting in front of that computer and we would be watching back some of those videos with a magnifying glass down to the frame to cut things out, and the attentiveness and the exhaustion. I said, is all of those skills you're using now as a mom. This isn't, what you and I are describing today is not some pretty analogy. We're not saying,
Right.
being alive
Exactly.
is like being an artist. We're not saying, that there is some kind of higher artistic angle you can take to the mundane drudgery of life. We're literally saying the highest art form is living your life and leaning into the process of making it something beautiful.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And any of the skills that an artist might perform, whether it's sculpting or video editing, as I was just saying, or the endless amounts of math I have to do when I make some kind of logo or graphic design, which side note, I feel very betrayed. I became an artist so I would never have to do science or math ever again. And I'm having to do
Wrong.
more math than I ever had to do in school, trying to figure out, how big the logo on the side of that semi-truck should be. But that said, all those skills that you cultivate as an artist are the very skills that give you fulfillment and edification when you apply them to making your life the highest artwork. Cool, man.
Exactly right.
This is very cool.
That's a great coda there to end that on. So why don't you move on to yours, because I think that's great.
Cool. Well, thank you. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. Start beginning, I guess, with your sentiment that we really just want to meditate upon, being artists and what that looks like. One really practical way, and this is so you mentioned. I guess I'll get into it this way. You mentioned a few minutes ago, right at the beginning of your explanation, this sort of uniqueness where each one of us has something unique to add, some unique beauty to contribute. Nobody can be me better than I can be me, sort of a mentality, but higher than that. And this first point of mine really follows through on that idea, which is, you and I have talked off air about how the psychological community stresses beauty really insofar as it stresses self-care, right? Which is, I think, well-intentioned, but falls really, really short. Beauty in life cannot just be taking a bubble bath, or, I kid you not, I read an article, they were saying the highest form of self-care is eating an orange in the shower, right? Like,
Okay. Newsflash, that is not the highest form of self-care.
It's not at all. It's not no, but not only is it not the highest form of self-care isn't the highest form of making things beautiful. And I talk to people all the time. We live in a very go kind of capitalistic society where, as we were saying before, beauty is given very, very, very low market value. It's very, very low on the to-do list. And these people I talk to, they burn themselves out and they're exhausted from all the work that they've done, and they choose to respond to that by, quote unquote, relaxing. And they will take a bath, or they'll watch TV, or they'll have a beer, or whatever it is. And I'm not going to sit here and say those things aren't good things in themselves or can't be good things. But what I will say is that as far as this conversation about beauty goes, what my counter proposal to doing something relaxing is doing something that um, shines a light on or otherwise highlights your you-ness. And this is, this, I guess, in a nutshell, is my main point of something a person can do to make their life more beautiful, is actively prioritize doing some small thing, small being the operative word here, because we don't want to think in binaries where it's all or nothing, right? But actively prioritizing some small thing that reminds you of who you truly are. So I will, for instance, I will say to, the overworked mom, I'm like, when's the last time you wore this piece of jewelry that really made you feel like you? Or I'll ask a depressed dad at work. I'm like, when you imagined being this powerhouse business guy, how did you imagine dressing? Or I'll say, like, think of the times where you felt most you, where you've sat there and said, wow, only I could have done this the way that I did this. How did you feel when you said that? And what was it that you were doing that made you do that? That's the sort of thing that God's put on your heart to be your personal brand of quote unquote relaxation. Don't get me wrong. There are people in the world who really feel relaxed going and sitting on a beach, right? There are also people in the world who might feel the absence of overworked by sitting on a beach, but don't feel relaxed there. Right? Because those are two different things. Likewise, I was picking on Disneyland earlier, but like, there are people, most of us could never go to Disney and have a relaxing time. That's a death march experience for most of us. But there are some people I know, and as much as I love Disney parks and all those things, I am not one of these people who absolutely make every one of their vacations going to Disney because there's something about it that relaxes them on a fundamental level. And the reason for that is there is something for those people about being at Disney that reminds them of who they truly are. And the people who relax on the beach, there's something about being on that beach that reminds them of who they truly are. For me, like, there is nothing that kind of gets my spirituality back on track like sitting on a boat in the ocean. Being able to connect with Christ in that way, like imagining him sitting on the boat in the ocean, and the countless gospels where he does that, and he, and reflecting on my own smallness in the ocean, and being in the, part of the grander scheme of God and all those things. All of those ideas become 1,000% more visceral when I'm sitting on a boat in the ocean. Now, if I can have a margarita in my hand, all the better, but I'm not there because, I just don't want to be working. I'm there because it reminds me about something about me. So on the skit, whether we're talking about the small stuff like, hey, are you dressing like the ideal you wants to dress? Oh, I can't do that because that would take an extra 15 minutes, in the morning. Okay, get up a little bit earlier and dress the way the ideal you dresses, because it will make you feel better throughout the day. Or whether it's on the grand scale, choosing a vacation destination based not on what's going to be the least worky, but the most you-y, so to speak. Another example, the last several weeks I've been having, because I made the mistake of taking on too many projects at the same time, I've been having to produce more art than I've ever produced in a single stint ever. It's been a lot. And there've been several times where I have sat there and been like, I just want to turn on the TV and watch like the dumbest movie I can find. But in those moments, I have pushed myself and to do something that is central to my me-ness, at certain points, including drawing more. But this time I'm going to draw something not for a client, not for a job, but something silly that only I like, right? Because hey, who Jacob is, and at least in part, is this artist, and I want to create something that's going to just give me joy. And even though that is going to take a little bit more of the gas reserve at the bottom of my tank, it's going to multiply that fuel so much more than just sitting there and watching a stupid movie would. And so this is generally a charism that I push on everybody, but it's, in part because it forces us, I think, to, and I know I'm rambling here, but I think it forces us to get to know ourselves a little bit more. You know, you were talking about leaning into the particular ways that God has called you to make your life a particular work of art. And it's easy to just say, oh, I'm going to not work today and that's going to be my relaxation. It's hard to say, hey, what makes me me and what things can I do to facilitate more me-ness? That is a much more difficult, thought provoking, awareness centered, mindful process, right? But it's more worth it as a result of it, as a result of that hard work. And so, you know, I always recommend this to people, both because of the self-awareness it encourages, and also because genuinely you feel a hell of a lot better after spending 15 minutes doing something that's authentic to you than you do fitting into some bizarre, objective cultural standard for what a lack of work looks like.
Right. You know, I think that's really helpful. I had never thought about it in that kind of terms, but you know, I I remember sort of first realizing very clearly when I was in college that basically if I'm not working on a novel, I mean reading a novel. If I'm not like reading a novel, um at some point, like over the course of a couple of days, you know, or whatever, basically I go nuts. It's like very psychologically unhealthy. And in fact, like this last much of these last 9 months, I was working on this big academic project where I just didn't have time. I was reading academic stuff like 12 hours a day, and then by the time that I was done, I was just so I just couldn't hold the book anymore, and it was just like, and so I basically didn't read a novel for like, well, not very many at least, for like 9 months, which is something that's like never happened to me before. And it was like not great. It was not a good thing for me, you know, because in the end I couldn't ever like really. It was I had in the end partly had to I realized I had to like find other ways to actually like be regenerated, like recreated in that. Because this one that was like always my way of being like remade alive was for this particular reason not available, you know. um but I get it, because like, um you know, I've had these experiences where, again, I would never have thought to put it in those ways, in that term, but like I've had these experiences where it's like, well, I have like an afternoon free or whatever, I could like take a nap. And believe me, I mean, sometimes you just need to take a nap, but like,
Sure,
I
yeah.
could like take a nap, or I could do whatever, or I could like take a novel and like go somewhere and like get a coffee and just like sit with my novel for like an hour. And it's amazing because at the end of that, I just like feel like so much more of a human being, you know?
Sure, yeah.
Like just genuinely like a human being. It's amazing.
And this is something we've all viscerally experienced throughout the pandemic, because I think
Mm,
there were so many of us who at the beginning of the pandemic said, okay, this is a tough situation, but I'm going to make the best of it. I'm going to learn this language and I'm going to learn this new skill and I'm going to read these 3 books that have been sitting there. And I don't know a single bloody person in the world who did it. And if you are that person who did it, don't say so, because we're all going to come to your house and stone you for it because we hate you, right? You know, this is just not something that any of us were able to do. And I think if my experience personally was indicative of anyone else's experience, and I suspect that it was based on who I've, based on what I've heard from who I've talked to, you know, a lot of us were very anxious and frustrated and depressed and stir crazy at different times. And because of that, we chose to do things that the culture has taught us are relaxing. And we
mm,
said, okay, I'm going to watch this show, or I'm going to binge this thing, or I'm going to, eat this snack or whatever it is. And again, I don't want to sound like that guy who says, oh, don't watch TV, go outside and take a walk. Look, there are certain people for whom binging that particular show does reflect their you-ness to them. Right? And I'm not going to knock if that's the particular way to do it. What I'm going to knock is not doing that intentionally. If you're just settling on the show because you're like, I want to turn my brain off for a while, that's bad and it's not going to fill you up again. If you're intentionally saying, hey, there's something about this show that is going to reinvigorate me, or this book that's going to restore me, or this taking a walk in the woods that's going to, refill me, or this drawing that's going to, edify me. If you're saying that with that charism of intentionality, bangarang, like that's fantastic. But again, to go off of your point, God made us as his artworks to continue the artwork, to continue, quote unquote, finishing, to use my Disneyland example, the artwork that we are. We got to know what he's already done. I can't just go in to the studio with a master and see a half finished painting or a 3/4 finished painting and then just take random paints and start splashing them on. I've got to study that painting closely and say, okay, where did he leave off? Why did he leave off this way? What size strokes are he using? What colors of paint is he using? What brushes is he using for this part versus that part, right? I have to figure out the process up until that point before I pick up the baton or the paintbrush, for the sake of this analogy, right? And in the same way, if I'm going to work on restoring myself, if I'm going to work on beautifying my own life, I got to figure out what the hell, God made so unique about me and perpetuate that thing.
Right.
And so even if you have read 100 books for school and you can't imagine looking at another page, but then you go, hey, but there's something about me that says I really fill up after reading another novel. Or if there's, or if you have done 100 logo designs for somebody, but you're like, man, I really just want to doodle a dragon now, right? If that's who you are, there is something sacramental, I think, in leaning into that you-ness.
Yeah. Yeah, I I would think about this like often, or related things like various things that will come up in the confessional that you can tell is just like people being kind of the sinful results of being just keyed up, like over keyed up and like never being anything but keyed up,
Right.
You just say like, well, here's the thing, like it's a little bit like Ignatius's discernment of spirits, but just like very, it is actually just a little bit very practical, is you just think like, so you propose to yourself, I'm gonna do this thing. So you do that thing. How does that thing make you feel? Like, how do you feel when you're doing it, and how do you feel afterwards? And like, and use that as a kind of like divining rod to figure out like what is generative, like what's actually recreated, what's in your language, like what's really fitting in with the kind of you-ness of who I am, that thereby naturally generates new life in me, that is actually recreative and not just recreation. If I could put it that way.
Ooh, I like that. Recreative
I
versus recreation. There you go.
did it.
That's our bumper sticker.
But we did it. It's a terrible bumper sticker. It's the worst.
I've seen worse ones. I promise you, I've seen worse ones.
Probably true. So, but just for instance, like, let me give you like a casual example. Like when I was a kid, we didn't really watch TV very much. We were allowed to watch like an hour a week, except for on Sunday mornings, because then my parents would sleep in would be allowed to sleep in if we were allowed to watch cartoons in the morning. And so we had this kind of like all you can watch Saturday morning cartoons thing going on, because then my parents would sleep in. And so I remember like, but like again, because of like not being used to TV at all, and then like suddenly watching like 2 or 3 hours of TV like all in a row, I always just remember like walking upstairs afterwards feeling like I had like a headache. I felt like dizzy. I felt like garbage. I just like felt physically like garbage because I was just not used to being force fed that much,
Right.
And but like we can use these things, so again, like, and actually I also had a similar experience one time. I used to play like a bunch of video games, and I personally stopped, in part because of, or almost entirely because of, experiences like this where I was playing The Sims, the first one, cuz like that's I'm old. And and it's a game you kind of get immersed in, like there's no beginning, there's no plot, you're just doing stuff. And I remember like so I played for like a whole evening or something, and I turned it off, and it's just like I feel like garbage. I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I was having fun, like I was relaxing, like I was listening to music, I was playing this game, I was doing whatever, seeing like this is just the thing that I needed at the moment. But in the end, I felt like garbage, and I just realized like this is not actually helping
Right.
anything.
And I think that, you know, I think a lot of people have had that experience, including me. But I think pop psychology um, stops at, oh, well, therefore that thing is bad for us, right? Um, and I just want to push it further than that and say, no, maybe that thing is just not right for you, right? That, and that's what I really want to push. Plenty of parents and psychotherapists and pastors out there say, oh, too much screen time is bad and too much video games are bad. But guess what? There are some people who feel really filled up after playing, a video game with their friends or whatever. That's fine. If you're self-aware enough to know that that's who you are on some level, and if you can connect and say, hey, this video game is able to shine a spotlight on this particular component or charism or part of who I truly am, and it reminds me of this value or characteristic that I have, and maybe even emboldens that part of me or polishes it somehow. If you are intentional enough to be able to say that, and you can say that honestly, again, more power to you. They're legitimately, I mean, I love television, and if you are a client of mine and you get through a session without 3 pop culture references, you should consider yourself very, very fortunate, because it's rare, you know. But I'm not just, and not to knock anybody for whom this is the, particular thing that they do, but I'm not watching, I'm not binging The Office for the 7th time in 2 weeks when I watch television. I'm saying, wow, this thing looks really interesting, or what can this thing teach me, or what insight does this make me think about? I'm actively engaging with the thing. I'm not just shutting my brain off. And there's a way to do that with anything, right? Anything you like, there's a way to actively engage with it. And I think active engagement, intention, and intentionality, I think both those things are always, value goods for the human person. But the
Yeah,
more we
I
can
think
grow
that's
in our
right.
understanding of our own, I think the healthier and happier we become.
Sure. Yeah, and I would just say like, but be careful of anything that sounds like this. Like this is not an on-off switch.
Mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm.
this isn't. And I know you're pushing back against that, but just like, um, to push back more is like, this doesn't just mean, oh well, this is all evil or this is all good.
Sure,
Like
yeah.
this is the thing that kind of builds up who I am, and so like I can just do it like forever. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, even the examples I gave, like maybe like watching TV or playing this game for like half an hour or whatever actually would have been really refreshing and really great, and then move on. But like at the point where, and this is where you're saying with like intentionality and focus and like actual consciousness of what I'm doing, uh, I have to actually think like this was good for 15 minutes. Is it good for 6 hours today? You
Right.
know?
It's funny you say that, because in addition to the Disneyland analogy that I often use with clients, the other analogy I use to explain what human progress is actually like, because again, I think the discouraging model many of my clients will fall into is this idea that life is a race, and
Yeah.
I get to the end of the race, I've completed all of my objectives. And then was talking to a fellow the other night who described it this way. He says, I do everything my wife asked me to do, and then I get to the end of the finish line, and she says, okay, run 5 more miles.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's so discouraging. And I said, okay. I said, I think the discouragement though is in the perspective. I said, there's, and I forget where this is. But so maybe if tell me, but, this is true. There is a pot of stew in France that has been cooking and being served for 400 years. The same pot of stew. And they keep it at a certain temperature where it doesn't like get all bacteria ridden. And they just serve out of this bowl of stew, and they add more to it every day. So, on the one hand, it's sort of a ship of Theseus, where it's not exactly the same stew that someone was eating 400 years ago, but it's also, the same bowl, the same batch, all of that, and so every day, the cook presumably wakes up and tastes the stew and says, okay, does this need a little bit more flour to thicken it? Does it need a little bit more chicken stock to thin it? Does it need a little bit more garlic to flavor it? Does it need a little bit less spice and actually we need to sweeten it some, right? There is this constant, intimate investment in the making of this stew, this radical intentionality that says, number one, I need to be actively watching and participating in the creation of this stew in order to keep it tasting as delicious as it was yesterday. And number two, just because I put more garlic in it yesterday doesn't mean that I necessarily have to put more garlic in it today. That is to say, what worked yesterday does not necessarily work today. And also, if it doesn't work today, that doesn't mean that yesterday by putting more garlic in it, I'm a failure, right? It means I was intimately aware of the stew. And in the same way, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, just because you have decided that for right now, something reflects your you-ness unto you, doesn't mean it's going to even, not just tomorrow, but doesn't even mean it's going to for the rest of the day. And being able to practice that kind of self-awareness that allows you to taste the stew, to study the painting, to, look at the map of the theme park you're building, to visit upon any of the analogies we posted thus far, and evaluate consciously and intentionally and self-awaredly, hey, what does this need more of? I think is really the key to, as you said, when you talked about, reading a novel at a coffee shop, getting in touch with your most humanness.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think that makes sense.
Cool. So I'm fascinated. I think your next point is probably a really, just having we didn't really talk about what our points were going to be before this, but we sort of read each other's bullets, the titles of things. And I'm guessing that your point is going to flow pretty well from what I'm saying here. Why don't you take it away with what your next concrete would be in terms of making life more beautiful for our listeners?
I just say observe stuff.
Observe
That's it.
stuff.
I'm done. That's just it. Like just observe stuff, It's amazing. Like I'm listening right now to this audiobook of Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. It's the memoirs of Richard Feynman, who is this Nobel Prize winning physicist in the middle of the century. He worked on the Manhattan Project and like whatever. He's this fascinating guy and like really wild. So he's this like, he's telling you these stories and they're just like, they will boggle your mind. He'll be like working on the Manhattan Project.
Always a fun thing to do.
How do locks work? And then he'll just like pick up a lock and like play with a lock and like all this. And then he like gets some books on locksmithing and then like lock picking and he like studies lock picking and then he like plays with locks and then they get these locking filing cabinets where they're keeping like nuclear secrets. And he sort of learns to pick them basically by just like, he takes the lock off of his and just spends all of his free time working with this lock, just like picking it apart, seeing how it works, all this works. You just think, this guy's working on the Manhattan Project. He has like better things to do with his time than like figure out how locks work. But he's just really focused on this lock. And it ends up being, I mean, it's because he's a wild biography. It ends up being really important in his biography for various things. But like, but he also does all kinds of other things. Like he has these, not just when he's a kid, like as an adult and as like somebody again who's doing like important physics kind of work and things and like winning the Nobel Prize. He'll just like talk about just stopping and seeing an ant and just staring at this ant for like 20 minutes. And of course he like has a little like magnifying glass thing on him that he's just like looking at this ant for like 20 minutes. And I just remember thinking, like, dude, you got stuff to do. You got to go, bro. I
Brings
mean, like,
whole
you
new
don't need
meaning to
to.
stop and smell the roses when you're literally stopping and smelling them for 20 minutes with a magnifying glass.
Exactly. And like, there's another guy who this is like there's a beautiful model for me is there's this really marvelous book by a guy named Gerald Durrell called My Life and Other Animals. I believe he's a British dude but he grew up in Corfu. And he he just has all these incredibly wild stories about like, so he'd like go somewhere and he would see some insects or animals or whatever doing some kind of interesting thing as a kid, and he would just watch them all day. He would just like find an interesting like nest of insects or whatever, and you just like lie on his belly and just watch them for the next 6 hours, and then he would go back home.
Wow.
And you think, why did he do that? Because they were amazing. Because like these birds or bugs or animals or whatever they were amazing, and just he would watch them, and he learned to watch them, and learned how to distinguish what the things that they were doing, and learned like to distinguish the individual creatures, and like to learn the patterns of their motion and why it mattered what they did, what they did, and they do all these things that like, how else would you ever know? And I just like feel really, I'm frankly kind of moved to a kind of compunction by stories like these, because um why don't I do that more than I do? And I don't mean this in a kind of naggy like another thing on my to do list, but like precisely that. Like, I do, you do see these really amazing things, but like, to actually stop and take the time and to observe them closely, and actually just try to turn off your mental clock and just sit with something for long enough for it to begin to sort of open up to you,
Mm-hmm.
is a gift. And it's a powerful way of like actually entering into the beauty of the world around you just as such. And one thing that I really love about that is that it's not, like dominated by, the payout is not per se information, right? The
Sure.
payout is not something that you're going to like update the Wikipedia page with. And that means that the experience is also not can't be replaced by just like looking something up on like Wikipedia, like, oh, why do cicadas have this kind of a wing? Well, because, fine. Um, because it's you, and you're the one who's discovering it, and you're the one who's watching them, and you see things that other people aren't going to see. um it's funny, like, I know this about art in my own experience when I go to art museums, just as kind of like a act of charity slash like what we call like custard of the eyes in Catholic religious speech, which sometimes is just a slang for like don't look at hot ladies for too long, but really means that like you are intentional about how you gaze, with your eye, what
Mm-hmm.
you're intentional about how you look at things even. And like, so as that act of charity, I have to kind of just like stop looking at the other people around me, because otherwise I get really annoyed that like this is like incredible masterpiece, this is incredible treasure, and people like look at it, take a photograph, walk away, forget they ever saw it. And it's
Sure,
like,
yeah.
so like I know this about
Their
art
lack of
museums.
mindfulness and intentionality actually inhibits your ability to be mindful and intentional if you're not careful.
Yeah, if I'm not, if yeah, exactly. Like it just activates like all of my jerk complexes, which are immense. Really, it's like a whole. It's incredible. Like this, wow, whole terra way cognita. About about all of those things that make me irrationally angry. And but anyway, but it's like I know this at an art museum is like you go and you just like wander around till you find something that strikes you, and then you just like abandon all other projects. It's just like, this is the trick, by the way. If you want a trick for how to go to an art museum, this is how you do it. You just walk around till you find something that like, grabs your attention, and you abandon any notion that there's a rest of the museum, and you just sit down and you look at the thing.
Yeah. And I will say, I will give full credit to my mother. This is something that she really instilled in us pretty early. She would give me a drawing pad, and she would give me some crayons or pencils or whatever as I was getting older. And we would go to an art museum, and I was just encouraged to wander around until I found a painting or an artwork or Because in Pittsburgh, the art museum and the natural history museum are connected. I might even find a taxidermied animal or a skeleton of a dinosaur, and I would just sit there and sketch whatever came to mind, and I would be there for 5 hours at a time. And this is something
Yeah.
that she actively encouraged us to do. She said, "Okay, Saturday we're just going to the museum with your drawing pad. You just find something and you just sit there, and I'll come and collect you at the end of the day." And it was one of the most priceless gifts she gave me, because it really instilled this idea of just observing really, really early on. The other thing that you're talking about that reminds me, you say custody of the eyes is often just kind of bullshit code for not looking at hot ladies. It's funny though that you say that, because Christopher West tells a story, and I don't remember who or what priest this is a story about, but Christopher West always tells a story about a priest who works at a Christian campus and will walk around, and sometimes he'll see couples in the fall or late spring making out on the field or on the green or whatever, and he'll just sort of come up behind them and like sit down next to them uncomfortably close and just look at the sky. He's like, "Have you ever observed the beauty of the stars?" And we'll just sit there with them for like 10 or 15 minutes just looking at the stars, and they're like, "Wow, thanks for letting me look at the stars with you guys. See you later." And then just gets up and goes away. Now, on the one hand, you could see that very dryly and cynically as just misdirection from, letting these couples make out with each other. But I think the far more profound way to look at it, I believe this is the way the priest looks at it, and it's certainly the way Christopher looks at it, is that, this is a person encouraging to people who have observed beauty in each other to then open their eyes more fully to the even greater, more cosmic beauty around them, to take that little crack of the door that they've opened. They think they're going, quote unquote, too far, and that the priest is gonna be mad at them for going, quote unquote, too far. But he actually comes and flings the door wide open and says, "Hey, no, let's observe all of the beauty. Let's really let God into this moment and just, really let that flow and just study the beauty of the stars, of each other, for goodness sake, and not make this such a rush to, get to the finish line of orgasm, but instead to, really experience authentic beauty in this cosmic moment." And I think that's a beautiful, it's a funny story, but it's also a beautiful example, I think, of the kind of thing you're talking about here.
Yeah, that's right. And like that it does just take this profound, like, it takes a certain kind of discipline, because you do have to be willing to just bracket like all the other things I thought I was going to do with this next like 15 minutes or whatever, or this like immediate goal that I was pretty sure I was heading towards, and just be like, well, I'm gonna do this thing, and
Yeah.
just give it all the time that it needs.
Yeah.
And that's that.
Yeah. And you have to silence
Like,
about
there's
a
something
million
really-
screaming voices in your head in order to do that. And a million voices saying, "No, you got to go do this thing," or "No, you've got to learn enough about this that you could add an entry to the Wikipedia page for it," as you said. But if you can learn to just say, "Hey, voices, like, I'll get to you in a minute, but first,
Yeah.
I'm going to learn
It's
how
like, "Hey,
locks
honey."
work."
Yeah, exactly. And that, like, don't waste too much time trying to convince yourself like why this is useful or important. Like, it's good in itself. So do it. Just actually take that time to sort of observe and learn to observe, because it's clear this is learned behavior. Like, the heart wants to know, like the mind just wants to know naturally, and we want to dig really deep down inside things richly with how we know them, at some kind of natural level, but to actually be able to do that is learned behavior. Like, those are things that you learn how to do,
Right.
and so it's good to just actually let yourself take that time to like pause and observe something that has grabbed your attention. I'd say particularly something in the like natural or exterior or say artistic or whatever world, which is to say, I think this is going to be hard to do in like in a computer world,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying computers are bad. I just think that like the symbolic valences about that, like everything's going to get so wrapped up in kind of like search engines and tracking things down and like
Mhm.
all of this, that I think it's gonna be pretty hard to really actually just let yourself sit with something and observe it.
Right.
Um, so I'd say like maybe like I'm not sure I could really do that. At least let me put
No.
it that way.
Well, and I think because we're not smart enough to do that, I think. I think our brains say, okay, but what I'm looking at is a computer. And so
Yeah,
if you're actually practicing this kind of intentional observance or observation, the way that you and I are describing it right now, if you're actually existing that presently with the object you're studying, if that object happens to be on a screen, your brain is going to pivot, rightfully so, to just studying the screen. And look,
yeah,
I'm not going to say that that's necessarily like a bad thing to study in the same way that locks aren't a bad thing to study. You really want to understand how a computer works. That could be cool, right? But there are many other things you should also want to just sit there and observe for a while. So don't let them all be via this one channel.
right. Yeah, exactly. And there's something one thing I think find particularly gripping about this kind of notion of just simply like observing nature, just natural things happening as they're going to happen, is the very fact that they are outside of your control. Like that's it. Like I think that's an element of this observation that is really really important. Is that I can see something and sort of dig by looking deep down into it in a very powerful way. But it is outside my control. It's gonna do its own thing, you know. So like
Mm-hmm.
that's a powerful thing about a living creature in the world, you know. Um, Sunsets, sunrises, whatever. But those are real too, you know. That they, again, they have their own pace, they have their own rhythm, and it is outside of me, whether I want it to be so or not.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually, I mean, similar actually with an artwork. Like I can't make it be different than it is. And that's part of the power of the observation, is that I actually have to learn to be receptive of the thing as it is, and I can't change it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where again, like that's why I say like maybe don't jump into this with electronic kind of stuff, just because those can always be different than they are. They are always subject to my control in some fashion or another.
Mm-hmm.
I can always say enough and turn it off, you know. And so it's neat. I think it's more powerful and more helpful for like building this skill, building this like actual like openness to the beauty of the world around you, by intentionally choosing something that escapes your ability to like turn it on or off, make it be different than it is, all the rest.
Right. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, because I think for this to be successful, not only should you not be able to change it, but hopefully this doesn't sound too hippy dippy, but it should really be changing you, right? Part of the beauty of something that is paced that differently from the way that you are paced is it inadvertently encourages you to synchronize yourself with it. If I am sitting there and I'm just observing, the sunset or the ant, you know, unconsciously my mirror neurons are going to be synchronizing with that thing, and my pulse is going to be slowing down to match that. My breathing is going to slow down to match that. I am actually drawing closer to that thing, and it's adjusting me simply by nature of my observing it authentically. And that's a
Yeah.
really cool mental health thing to be able to do, to look at
Mm.
something so closely that it actually forces a biochemical change is a huge deal. And I mean, it's funny. Some people laugh at this, but I think it's profound. As we get better at this process, it's something that I will often encourage clients to do, especially if they have some wound with feeling ugly or body dysmorphia or something like this, where I will have them stand in the shower and look at a certain part of their own body this way. you
Hmm.
know are
Interesting.
you taking the time to observe the wrinkles on my hand? Am I taking the time to observe the weird bump on my foot? Am I taking the time? Let's put our mature adult hats here on. Am I taking the time to marvel at God's handiwork in my penis or in my breasts or in the different parts of my body as it was made? Being able to even observe that, I think that's a logical conclusion of this kind of practical mysticism you're describing, because it actually then in the spirit of all the other points we made so far, reorients you back not to just an ant, but reorients you back to you, which is, the ultimate goal of all of these things. So it's cool the lengths to which we can take an exercise that at first glance seems so simple. Go look at an ant for a while. I mean, you literally summed it up as observe things, right? But there's so much there. There's so much to unpack in observe things, and there's so much room for exploration and growth and discovery that it really can afford to be an endless process in a good way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I just say, like, because the end goal of all of this is not really to go back to you, but for you to be drawn into God.
Right.
This is actually this connects all of these things, so they're not disparate experiences. They're not disparate realities. Like the ant out there that I keep out by like bug spray and like sealable windows, like my body, which I secretly am obsessed with, but also like hide or feel ashamed about, or like hide under decorations of various kinds, and then like God, whom I hide myself from, who like I let hide in a church somewhere or whatever. But like no, that we have to like actually like that this skill of observation is the freedom to be able to like see how these are all radiant together, that it is the God who created the universe and made it good that like radiates out through all of these things, and that I can actually begin to learn to see his beauty in this very like humble and unassuming kind of way. Exactly.
That's super cool. And I think it perfectly pivots me into my last point, which is very brief and very concrete. And that's just, if any of the things that we have talked about today have resonated with you at all, schedule it. Let that be your first step. In our world today, there is sort of this, I think, artificial war between what's considered spiritual and what's considered religious. But primarily what is considered religious is that which is structured, right? Human beings need structure. I talk to people all the time who says, oh yeah, I can't wait to do that when things calm down.
Oh yeah, what a bunch of nonsense. This is why nobody did anything during the pandemic. It's like, oh well, when I just got a little bit more myself, it's like, guess what? That's never gonna happen.
Never
just do it.
Ever gonna happen unless you make it happen. So, if you want to, and this is sort of by way of summary, if you want to reflect, as Father Gabriel says, on the fact that you are both art and artist, and that your life itself is a work of art, freaking schedule a time to do that. On Thursday at 1 p.m., I'm going to sit down and I'm going to take an hour to journal through what Father Gabriel said on the Created Things podcast, and I'm just going to examine and pray a little bit. I'm going to enter in a space of prayer, and I'm just going to examine what it looks like for me to be an artist of my own life artwork. If you were listening to me and you say, hey, yeah, Jacob's right. I do want to have some time to, take that walk in the woods, or draw that picture, or read that book, or whatever it is that I have determined that, reflects my meanness back onto myself, or, maybe more rudimentarily, saying, hey, I don't know what that thing is yet, but I want to take some time to figure out what it is. Either way, freaking journal that too. Schedule that too. Take that time to sit with it. Schedule it in advance. Somebody tells you, oh, hey, can you go do this errand for me? I'm so sorry. I would love to help you with that thing at a different time. I have a standing meeting at that time with myself to do, to do the thing that reminds me of my meanness, to explore, what it means to be an artist of my own life, to, with your third point, to observe things. I am choosing once a week to give myself an hour to go sit in the yard and observe whatever shows up, whether that's a squirrel or a flower or the ant or the piece of poison ivy or that weed that I've been, reminding myself to get rid of for a million years. I'm assigning this as part of my actual schedule. If anything that you've heard today resonates with you at all, and you don't schedule it, the message you are sending to your brain is that none of this matters. And because what we're talking about is at its center really you and God, That's the center of everything we've talked about. The idea that you are an artist is about you and God. The idea of observing things truly is about seeing them as God made them and seeing yourself as God made you. The idea of doing something that reminds you of your Eunice is explicitly about you and God, right? So if you are telling yourself unconsciously that this stuff doesn't matter enough to schedule, you are really telling yourself that you and God don't matter. That is the signal that your lower brain is going to be receiving as a result of your actions. And you are going to end your day that much more depressed and emptied because secretly and unconsciously you've been feeding yourself the message that you don't matter for 14 hours before you crash at night. And that's going to be, you're going to be so much worse off for having listened to this podcast, because before listening to this podcast, it was just, hey, I work myself to death and then I watch this dumb show and then I pass out for the night, right? Which is destructive enough. But now, because of this information we've given you, you're going to be sending yourself the unconscious message that if you don't schedule time to do this, that it's because you suck and you hate yourself and you aren't deserving.
This is always my
of it.
goal. Yeah. This is
Right?
my goal.
So we have given you a hammer and you can build a beautiful house with it, or you can beat yourself to death with it. But we strongly encourage you to build a house with it. And the first step to building that house is scheduling the time to do these things. We're Catholics, right? We are Catholics. We are organized religion. We have the liturgy of the hours. We have mass at these specific times, every day and once a week. We recognize that as beautiful as it is to stare at that ant, we as human beings are too obsessed with the ephemeral and the hustle to possibly slow ourselves down organically. So, Christian, know thyself. Just plan to do this and then reap the benefits as a result.
Yeah.
Anything to add there to that idea, Father?
The one thing I'd say is that with it and kind of is also like, so I remember when I was just starting out as a Dominican, as a novice, someone told me, or I read in a book something that like, if you're reading something, even if it's like the Bible, and something grabs, like some kind of spiritual thing kind of reaches up and like grabs your attention, stop what you're doing right away and just stop what you are doing and give all of your attention to that thing. I'm talking like, if you're reading the Bible and you're like, well, I'm just going to get to the end of this paragraph. Don't. You're reading like any kind of like novel or something, and something strikes you and grabs you. Don't get to the end of the chapter. Don't get to the end of the page. Don't get to the end of the paragraph. Stop what you are doing and just like sit with that thing that grabbed you.
That's beautiful.
Like, it's really, I can tell you like this I can tell you from like practical hard experience, because I am a finisher, especially where books are involved. I am a finisher. Like I don't stop midway ever, so like it was a hard discipline to learn, but I promise you, literally every time I've said to myself, like, well, you know what? I'm just going to get to the end of this paragraph. That's stupid, but then be gone. Because it's just a kind of like a flash of insight. It's like a gift of the Holy Spirit, a kind of like a little like brush of grace from God, like a certain lifting up of the heart to prayer, an invitation of the heart to prayer. And then at the natural level, sometimes it's just like insights, like certain kinds of ways of grabbing something fascinating from what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're thinking about, what's just happened. Stop what you were doing. Stop what you're doing. Bam, on the spot. And like, let that be.
And I think of all the things
be,
that we've talked about, because I mean, I will do this too, right? I was taught by a spiritual mentor very early on that like if I was in prayer ever and a song found its way into my head or a movie clip found its way into my memory while I was in prayer, to assume that to not try to ignore that thought and focus harder on the prayer, but rather to assume that was God talking to me through the lyrics of that song or through the movie clip or whatever that was coming into my memory. And so, this is something that I will often do, where I will sit there and I'll be, saying whatever prayer I feel like I'm supposed to be saying, and then something will creep in and I'll go, oh, okay, God wants me thinking about this thing instead right now. And it always leads to rich spiritual fruit. So I totally agree with you there. The caveat that I'd throw in, though, is that I also recognize, as a person who's a little bit of a workaholic, that is very, 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 very hard to do. I mean, you are reflecting
Yeah.
that in your own story.
It's really hard.
And you need to teach your body, because, you know, we're like cars. We have this momentum behind us all the time. And if you stop short, you know, you are going to go through the windshield of your own psyche, right? And so teaching your body that slowing that car down is actually a high value good, so that you can feel comfortable and safe to, when something occurs to you, just stop and explore it the way Father is describing, is really, really important. And the way you teach your body that is by doing what I'm talking about, which is scheduling times to do it. Because again, right now, you're telling your body that things are important by scheduling them. That meeting is important, so I schedule it. That soccer game is important, so I schedule it. If you aren't doing that with these other important things, you're telling your body that they aren't important. And you can never hope to get to the point that Father Gabriel's describing, where you just are able to kind of observe something and then chase that rabbit. You know, you need to first teach your body that that's a safe thing to do. So in summary, life is beautiful. And if you want to make it more beautiful, you know, do what we're talking about today. Observe things, as Father Gabriel said. You know, remember that you are an artist. Strive for recreativity. Is that how you put it, Father Gabriel? Recreativity versus recreation. I'm going to use that. And schedule all of these things to do, because you're worth it, and God made you to be worth it. And so with that in mind, I think it's as good a place as any to wrap up this episode. So we wish you a blessed day, and I invite you to go forth and create cool things. This has been Created Things, an art, soul, and mind production with Jacob Flores Popchek and Father Gabriel Torretta. Production by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on the podcast and on its hosts, visit artsoulandmind.com.